Hey, welcome everyone. We're glad you're here. We have an international crew today. People have joined from all over the world, so thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to have Tom, I'm going to have you go to the next slide. You're joining us for session 5 of our series. And again, we thank you for joining us today, along with our international partners who also are on our panel today. So we have Learn Fast from Australia. They also cover the New Zealand area. We have Stronger Brains based here in California. Brain Maps is based in Shanghai. And then we have Brain Fit, which is based in Singapore, but they also work with groups in Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Turkey. Next slide. I'd like to introduce you to your panelists. We have Alex Kitsis, who's a clinical psychologist and co-founder of Stronger Brains here in California. We have Cheryl Chia, who's a physiotherapist and founder of Singapore-based BrainFit. And we have Dave Stanley, who's the director of learning ecosystems at Learn Fast Australia. So thank you again for joining us. And I'd like to introduce you to your presenter today, Tom Nugent. Tom has over 20 years of experience in neuroscience research and program management, working with elite organizations ranging from professional sports teams, special operator communities in the US military and abroad, as well as esports athletes and teams. Tom has been involved in well over $250 million worth of research and development efforts in applied neuroscience and learning domains, with a career spanning from the National Institutes of Health to the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, to private sector companies developing bleeding edge neuroscience applications. A former Division I athlete and avid gamer, Tom received his undergraduate degree from Princeton University and his graduate degree from Duke University School of Medicine. Thank you, Tom.
Awesome. All right, well, thanks everybody. We think we had close to 2,000 registrants for this session, so that's pretty exciting. I know the time's a little tough, so I'm expecting a lot of people are going to be watching this offline later. But great to see the interest. For folks that are joining live, thanks for making the time, and for everybody else, welcome. So to get started, no matter what your age, we're all familiar with this illustrated concept, right? This idea of work, exercise, eat, sleep, rinse, and repeat. As research findings have shown, there's a little bit more to it than just that. Our earlier speakers in our earlier sessions have discussed the importance of sleep, of exercise, and nutrition with learning, and the fact that we can actually train our brains just like we train our bodies. The reality is our brain is at the center of all this. Athletes who are spending over $1 million a year just on their bodies are only now just starting to invest into their brains. So today's talk, we're gonna kind of leave the classroom behind and look at some elite brains. So what are we doing here? I always personally like to know what I'm walking into, so I thought it only fair to give you guys a little bit of a heads up on where today's discussion is going. We're gonna start with a warm-up, then we're gonna have a little bit of a neuro lesson, then look at the how with our scientific approach and methods, the why of why everyone should be considering this as the next must-have competitive advantage, and the who, where we see these amazing findings. So for as a quick warm-up, I thought we'd just try to get the room going a little bit. What I want everybody to do is take a look at this image. There is a little dot, I'll try to use my laser pointer, right in the middle of the screen here. And so I just want you to fixate on that dot, right? So don't move your head around, don't look around at anything else, just keep your eyes fixed on that. Try not to blink too much, just really fixate on that. This takes about 20 seconds to kick in, so I have to fill a little bit of airtime here, but I'll tell you that my first dissertation was on visual perception in humans, and so I thought a little bit of visual neuromagic would be a good crowd pleaser to start things off. So if everybody's continuing to stare, I'm going to change the image a little bit. Okay, so you should be seeing beautiful blue sky and green grass that surrounds the castle. or does it? So you'll notice that as I'm talking, and if you're moving your eyes around, the color's starting to fade away. The first image that I was making you stare at was actually fatiguing out your color receptors in your eyes, so that when I changed the image, you essentially saw the opposite colors when I presented to you a picture with the absence of color. So this black and white picture is exactly the same, but because I fatigued your eyes out, you actually got to see it in the colors that you would expect it to see. I think this is pretty awesome, and normally crowds like this, but it's virtual, so I'll just assume that there is a wave of oohs and ahs in the background as we took a look at this. Oh, I see clapping in the background. Excellent. Okay, excellent. Awesome. All right, so let's do another warm-up. So for this one, Kim is going to hopefully activate a Zoom poll that's going to pop up. All right, awesome. This probably popped up right in the center of your screen, so feel free to move it out of the way so that you can see exactly what's going on in the slide. For our folks that are going to be watching this offline and after the fact, here's the first question. And that question is the ballerina spinning clockwise, counterclockwise, or spinning back and forth? And here's the ballerina. So I'll give a couple seconds for our live participants to go ahead and choose what they're seeing. We get any results. All right. Kim, I don't see any coming in. I don't know if you do, but.
I don't. And the panelists can also vote, so go ahead and vote.
I did. I just didn't submit it because I'm waiting for the next question.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Oh,
and
yes.
then our second question is, do you see a bunny or a bird? Oh, there we go. Now it's coming in. All right, so I'm just waiting for a few more people to answer so we get close to the room. All right, so what's interesting here is we'll share the results in a minute. There we go, perfect. We're almost at a third each for the ballerina. So about a third of you are seeing her spin clockwise, a third of you are seeing her spin counterclockwise, and about a third of you are seeing her spin back and forth. What's great is that if you look at her, let's see if she's still spinning, there we go. If you look at the space between her foot and the shadow, you can actually trick yourself to get her to switch if she's going in one direction, so that's fun. And then for the bunny or the bird, I think it was a little bit more swayed in one direction. I lost my results. Yep, so a little bit more people went for the bird, which is the correct answer. But we did have a good chunk of folks that actually thought it was a rabbit. So, the idea behind this is, we're all seeing exactly the same thing. These are two visual perception kind of hacks, but essentially, even though we're seeing the same thing, our perception can be different. And while this is fun, it brings up a great point that our brains are different. And without good testing and good understanding of it, we're limited to our natural biases to see the things the way that we want to see them. So when it comes to our brain, the message here is that it's really important to be objective. So let's do a little bit of a history lesson here. There's no secret that there's a correlation between exercise and learning. A few of our earlier speakers have talked about that. But what about looking at it from the other direction, about learning and exercise? There's a physiologist, Angelo Mosso, who was the early discoverer of lactic acid buildup related to muscle fatigue. He was also very fascinated with the brain. And this is back in the 1880s, so quite a while ago. He actually went ahead and built this machine. This was called the human circulation balance. He believed that the brain would probably need more blood to it when it was working harder. So in essence, in 1880, this was the precursor for our modern day MRI. What he found was that mentally fatigued individuals showed a decrease in their ability to contract their muscles and put force on things. So essentially, mental fatigue was related to physical fatigue. And then since then, over the last 2 centuries, multiple studies have shown that training your brain to be more resilient leads to physical endurance. So literally, we saw the early findings of mind over matter. So I think that's just really important as we think about this in the context of sports and athletics throughout this talk. So let's talk about the brain itself. We've come a long way since that balance machine from the 1800s, and we've learned a lot more about our brain since then. 100 billion neurons, 10,000 direct connections, 1,000 trillion total connections. It's not quite lions and tigers and bears, but it is quite amazing when you think about everything that's going on inside your head. And so the point here is to really remember you have pathways and circuitry and networks that are controlling everything you do from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, and obviously during while you sleep as well. So to recap how we understand it and kind of touch back on some of the earlier sessions that we had, you can measure the brain generally in 3 different ways. For us, we initially like to think of brain anatomy, that we can essentially map out what parts of your brain are related to different global skills like vision, speech, and movement. Then we can start to look at how those anatomical areas communicate with each other to form brain networks for higher level things like decision-making and attention. And lastly, we can measure the frequency patterns of the electricity that travels between those different areas and networks to infer relationships to different behaviors like sleep, focus, and concentration. So cognitive functions. Okay, what's this all about? So I like to call what we do here at EPS being personal trainers, but from the neck up. When you go to a gym and hire a personal trainer to help you get in shape, what's the first thing that they do? They take measurements. Things like core strength, cardio, flexibility, all to get a picture of what to target and what needs the most help. From a neuro perspective, we do the same exact thing with your brain. But instead of looking at your squat strength, we look at things like attention, memory, processing speed, pattern recognition, and more. As Dr. Merznick spoke a few weeks ago, by measuring and understanding these for an individual, you can actually target training to strengthen these parts of your brain. Hopefully the video shows. So one of the great things about neuroscience is that the field has evolved quite a bit, especially in the domains of hardware and the algorithms that are used to measure and understand your brain. No longer do we have to wear the white lab coat and sit in a sterile, boring environment to collect data. From the baseball diamond to the pitch, we're able to collect data and measure your brain while you're actually doing things. I've collected data on professional basketball players, football players, baseball players, rugby league, while they're actually in their environments, to give them a better understanding of how their brain impacts their play and help them maximize their talent. And best of all is that when you can do this, you can hang out with a fellow panelist. Hey, Dave, remember this? When you're collecting world championship data. So nice little throwback from 2017. So what's the approach? Science is only as good as the methods. And for me, the best way to approach brain optimization is a series of 3 T's. Our first T is test. We need to get baseline information like you would at that gym. We need to identify your strengths and weaknesses. The second T is for training. We got your results, and now it's time to go to work. And then the third T is for track. Just like your muscles, if you do the same exercise over and over, you're going to hit a wall and stop seeing gains. So by tracking the changes, you can continue to modify your training to evolve with you in order to keep improving. So let's talk about that first T in testing. This is a seminal example where researchers worked with an MBA team and measured their visual processing speed, one of those vital signs that I talked about in the last slide. Brain processing speed is sort of like a computer's CPU, right? It's a measure of how quickly the brain processes and reacts to stimuli. So as the graph indicates, when you look at this, you're seeing that the higher the speed of the brain, the more assists and steals per minute of play in game. So essentially, brains that run faster are for better players, and better players are going to win. What's amazing about this is that even the slowest player in terms of their reaction speed is just miles and miles ahead of what the normal population is. So it just begins to speak to the difference between an elite athlete's brain and a normal everyday person's brain. So let's go into testing a little bit more and look at some testing insights. I think Steve might have shown a little bit of this prior in his session, but essentially this is how we record information. You can see an individual wearing an EEG headset. It's completely wireless, communicates with the laptop while they're doing different exercises. And then we can actually visualize the different levels of activity in their brain and the networks that are associated with that activity. So through testing, we found really interesting differences at the individual, group, and positional levels. As part of prior research, we've identified a specific brain state for expertise in military marksmen, and we've trained novices to become experts faster. We've identified the differences between a Heisman Trophy winner's brain and his backups by looking at their EEG data, very similar to what you're seeing in this video right here. In professional rugby league players, we saw significant differences between backs and forwards for visual spatial memory and pattern recognition. And in studying larger teams with multiple position types, we correctly identified starters versus subs based on cognitive testing alone, essentially creating a depth chart without using any physicality data. And lastly, not everyone learns the same. We can help you better connect with individuals to help them optimally absorb information during practice and hopefully reduce frustration and boredom. So a lot can be found just from that first T. So let's move on to the second T of training. So using the same vital sign of visual processing speed as that NBA example with the assists and steals, there was a study done with professional soccer players that showed that players who received training for the visual processing speed did better compared to players watching game film, which in this case was the active control, or doing nothing at all, which was the passive control. What's great about this is that it really shows the impact of cognitive training, and both rated by external coach evaluation, who weren't even the coaches of the players. This was a completely non-biased group. And then players themselves to see who is doing better. You're getting behavioral results, you're getting subjective reporting results, and you're getting neurocognitive results of seeing the impact of the training. But what I really like about this is that I think it shows that there's a ceiling for the amount of gains that you can find with just physical practice alone. So when you combine the concept of doing sports training and practice along with cognitive training, you're actually able to see the highest level of improvement in an individual or a group. So let's look at some of the insights that we found from training. This is one of my favorite GIFs. Steph Curry's dribbling a basketball with his offhand. He's catching a tennis ball with his dominant hand, all while wearing shutter glasses that are essentially making him blind. So he's only getting to see a few milliseconds of his visual field basically in bursts. So, imagine if you were, someone was just covering your eyes and uncovering your eyes very rapidly. That's what he's going through right now. It's pretty damn impressive. So the biggest question for training is always, does it work? And thankfully the answer is yes. And that's why Steve and I are doing what we do. But we see behavioral, neurocognitive, and neurophysiological improvements just weeks into the training. Studies have indicated that brain training can not only help lessen the severity of a concussive event, but can help accelerate remediation and recovery. And in addition to higher levels of confidence, players report better recognition of their internal states. So be it that they're stressed, nervous, have high emotions, or distracted, they're able to recognize them, reset, and get back out there and perform at their highest level. Part of this is knowing you need a good baseline in order to optimally train. And complexity is really important. So we as humans are super good at doing very difficult things easily. Just like you need to add more weight to an exercise in order to be able to see gains, you need to continue to challenge the brain in order to see improvement. And again, this is, let's look at what Steph's doing. He plays basketball, but he's doing this kind of crazy thing just to try to help improve his game. So the next 3 slides are going to touch on the final T of my 3T setup, which is tracking. And is a nice segue into my second alliteration of identification, improvement, and investment. So talent ID is hard work. Name a sport, and there's countless examples of poor decisions. The graph there on the right shows the likelihood of a bust pick based on draft position in the NFL. As you can see from the graph, you're already at an approximate 20% risk rate within the opening picks of the draft, and it only gets worse as the picks go on. A very recent example, painful to my heart as an Eagles fan, is that the career path of 2 top quarterbacks that were drafted in 2016, where massive trade-up investment and huge contracts were awarded. Both of these guys were touted as franchise players, and both were traded to new teams in the past month for what many consider to be a significant loss. So there's a huge amount of time, huge financial investment, emotional investment, and a lot of times it doesn't work. And why is that? Right now, a lot of talent ID is based off of physical combines. We see it on TV all the time, how high you can jump, how fast you can run, how well you can stretch. And surveys like the Wonderlic that have been used. And clearly it's not enough. And so by adding in these cognitive vital signs that I had mentioned, you're adding an additional layer of insight, and you're likely to find hidden gems and be able to better protect your investment in your time. Additionally, everybody is big, everybody's strong, and everybody's fast. Every facility is state-of-the-art for physical training, and now massive amounts of dollars are being spent on big data analytics on the quest for the next Moneyball finding. To me, neuroperformance is the next untapped resource, and this is going to become a competitive necessity in the coming years. So our next I is for improvement. Let me click on this video. I love this video. I'm sure a lot of folks have seen this, but this is a video of Ronaldo and his ability to track a ball. So what you're seeing here is that they shut the lights off in this environment after the ball's in the air to see if he's able to accurately guess where it should be in order to score. So what we're seeing on display for him, and let's just watch. So the lights are out, he was able to head the ball in, right? So completely in the dark, he was able to extrapolate based off of prior information. I think he kicks this one in, so we're able to see the pass, the lights are on. Shifting his weight, preparing, tracking, the lights are gonna shut off at some point soon. This is really in slow-mo. There we go. And just based off of everything that he had while the lights are on, he's still able to go after the ball. And so what we're seeing here is his visual processing on display, his decision-making, his reaction speed, pattern recognition, and that he has a strong memory database from prior knowledge. All things that he uses amazingly well from a cognitive standpoint, but all things that are also trainable. With this information and getting a baseline test during, let's say, the preseason, coaches can quantify learning styles of their players, identify their level of emotional resiliency, their performance under pressure, find players who would benefit from a cognitive warm-up or a cognitive cool-down or endurance streak. So the idea of being able to understand your athletes at a deeper level is going to lead to a better capability for you to work with. So just like you do physically, you need to target and attack the areas that need the most work in order to get the gains. And don't be afraid to test multiple times. Road trips for colleges, scholastic milestones like midterms and finals, or even holiday breaks, right? Understand the cognitive walls that have come up over the course of the season. Everybody is well-versed in their specific sport, that players just naturally fatigue and hit a wall at some point from a physical standpoint, but are they really taking into consideration the cognitive one? Let's look at this and see if we can offset the wear and tear so that a team is at its cognitive peak at the right time, which hopefully is the playoffs and deep into the championships. So let's look at our final I of investment. And to me, this is investment in yourself and investment in your players from a health and career standpoint. Neuroperformance doesn't just help on the field. We see quality of life improvements, including the reduction of the impact of stress to foster better recovery, improved academics, and better home life. I've mentioned the neuroprotective elements with cognitive training, but additionally, you can develop tailored remediation protocols to help players return to play faster and in better condition. For physical injuries, elite athletes have enhanced motor, perceptual, and decision-making abilities. A research study about 10 years ago has shown that expert brains are able to predict events by the movements of their opponents and use this predictive capability to increase the speed and accuracy of their own decisions. Early evidence around this currently is indicating that with this predictive power, the likelihood of lower limb injuries can be reduced because athletes are better able to position themselves for incoming tackles, impacts, or movements of their opponents. So training these capabilities up is really important in that regard. For players that are on IR or PUP lists, this can help prevent rust, right? You're sitting, you're watching, you're getting rusty, you're not able to get out there. You can train your brain while you're sidelined to be able to get back to top form the minute that you're cleared from rehab. And then prolonged careers. As players age, the concept of sports science has become more appealing to keep their body in peak physical condition. Maintaining brain health and your edge is just as important as your body as you naturally age. We're slowly starting to see a trend of players playing later in their career, and maintaining their cognitive skills is likely one of the main reasons. ESPN wrote an article 5 years ago about the top players over the age of 40 and the amazement of these prolonged careers. So Jágr, who is now actually 49, is still playing hockey at a professional level for the Czech Republic. And then obviously, and most recently in everybody's memory, we just saw Tom Brady win his 7th Super Bowl at age 43. So there's something to be said about this. So let's dig into the actual idea of the genius brains of athletes. For athletes, there's this dynamic series of processes involved that are always changing based on what's going on around them. Whether it's spending countless hours learning Rachmaninoff on piano or perfecting your step back jumper, those hours upon days upon years of practice leads to specialization. And while some may argue specialization is for insects, those that are considered geniuses in their respective field are displaying this specialization for the world to see. And so a quick shout out to our earlier viewers from our prior webinars where we had a lot of questions about auditory processing issues. There's a study just last year that showed that individuals who played sports had a better signal to noise ratio for auditory processing. Essentially, kids who played sports were better able to tune out distractions and focus on what was important to them at the time. So let's talk about athletic brains from a point of efficiency. A hallmark of a strong brain is its ability to conserve energy while performing complex actions. We find that there is greater neural efficiency in athletes compared to the general population. A research project found that elite soccer athletes dribbling at high speed through an obstacle course were able to do so without engaging their decision-making network, allowing that part of their brain to essentially be used for other things while on the field. When non-athletes were asked to do this task, they were bad at it. But when researchers increased their cognitive load by making them do another task while dribbling, they became even worse. The athletes were able to complete the additional task and showed no change in dribbling performance. In a study of karate champions versus everyday folks, athletes had a higher level of alpha wave activity when their eyes were closed, implying a higher level of restful waiting with the ability to jump into competition when needed. Something that Steve and I have seen over the past few years is that not only is reaction speed important, but so is your start time out of what we call the cognitive blocks. Better athletes were able to get themselves in the right state faster. And this concept of efficiency can also be found in less physically intense sports as well. So for all of my ping pong fans out there, there's a recent fMRI study done for pro table tennis players that showed increased speed of readiness in them as well. So it's not all about the high impact sports. Let's talk about structure. So German jugglers, scientists in Germany who studied jugglers found that when people were learning how to juggle, after only a week, their brains were showing gains in gray matter in some brain areas. These changes continued for months as they continued to train for something as relatively simple as juggling. Right? Elite athletes have a higher cortical thickness in some areas of their brain, such as the superior temporal sulcus, which is related to motion perception, leading to better ability to anticipate opponent movement, avoid tackles, and predict passing lanes. Multiple studies have looked at cortical thickness between athletes and non-athletes, and the results are consistent. Dat brain, right? Studies of professional divers have shown that divers' brains have a higher percentage of brain matter dedicated to learning and processing movement when compared to control groups. Parallel studies have been done between musicians and non-musicians and have shown similar structural differences in areas related to language, auditory processing, and fine motor control. And then lastly, there's a research group out of Italy that studied free throws in basketball. I actually love this study. They didn't actually study the shooters themselves, but they looked at the non-shooters who are watching the free throws. So let's dive into this a little bit. So the research group found that elite players could accurately predict the outcome of a free throw, whether it was a make or a miss, earlier and more accurately than a group of expert viewers, which was made up of journalists who watch basketball nonstop, coaches who obviously watch basketball nonstop, and a group of novices. Before the ball left the shooter's hand at about 486 milliseconds, experts were already able to predict 3 times more accurately than the coaches of whether or not that shot was going to go in. As we move to when the ball was released, still remember, we're at less than a second of time from when a free throw is started. Experts were 75% accurate in their prediction of a make or miss and nearly 2 times better than the coaches. What's fascinating about this is the fact that the athletes had a strong internal database of acquired knowledge, which they used to predict, along with the self-reference of what it felt like to actually take the shot. This leads to, in my opinion, the understanding that no matter how much basketball we watch, or any sport for that matter, we're never going to have the same type of brain or understanding of the game as the elite players do. So let's look at expertise now. This one's for our international audience, is a great study involving cricket. And so for in cricket and baseball, batters typically have about a half of a second to determine what the pitch is and whether they're going to swing. This study came out of Queensland, and they were interested to see who would be the best at identifying a pitch from a bowler. Essentially, expert players were able to make accurate predictions from just watching the bowler take a single step. So for non-cricketers, the bowler is the pitcher, right? So it's just a single step from the pitcher. Those experts were able to predict what type of pitch was coming at them. Versus novices who were still cricket players but not considered experts had to watch until the ball was in flight and out of the bowler's hands. This feeds into the cognitive vital signs of good memory for that internal mental database, pattern recognition, sustained attention, and focus. Researchers at Florida State University have shown that in milliseconds leading up to an athletic event, whether it's a tennis serve, a baseball pitch, a basketball shot, the brain is absorbing a massive amount of information. Better athletes move to this state of enhanced information uptake longer than novices. And what's really great about this is that the longer an athlete can enter this state, the better their performance is. Best part of all of it is that it's completely trainable. One of our colleagues in Canada has found that in a task that involved paying attention and tracking objects at high speed, elite athletes were able to not only start at a higher level of difficulty compared to non-athletes, but also could improve at a faster rate. In the years of our experience, we've yet to find performance ceilings with elite brains. Plateaus usually occur more because of drops of engagement, that players just kind of get bored of doing it, or a time commitment to the training. It would be fair to not include the e-athletes of the world. This stereotype of brainless jocks can also be found in the world of esports, as evidenced by my South Park friend there in the bottom right corner of that image. Sensory movement, decision-making, dopamine release, strategic planning and logistics, emotional suppression or enhancement can all be attributed to games depending on the content or the subtype of it. So if you're playing a strategy game versus a MOBA versus a first-person shooter versus a puzzle game, you're going to see different impacts on the brain and those cognitive vital signs. Research has indicated that gamers can process visual information faster and have better temporal selective attention, essentially choosing what to focus their brain power on in an optimal way. Enhanced gray matter volume and connectivity can be found in these related regions, and the more expertise in gaming, the greater the impact. And lastly, one study actually showed that the reaction speed of e-gamers is on par with fighter pilots. So there's a lot to be said for these types of athletes. This image here, this is a callback to some of our early webinars that focused on attention. The figure we're looking at is showing essentially a heat map for eye movement and gaze. And if you look at the top left one, which is labeled newbie, it's going from left to right and then down through to professional, you're going to see that the sloppiness and kind of the erratic movement of eye gaze goes from being very broad and unspecific to very tight and focused. And so this is just kind of a nice kind of endophenotype impact of seeing the impact of playing games on focus and precision attention. So similar to the results from a lot of the enrichment studies that we've seen in mice over the years, playing 3D immersive video games with significant cognitive demand can help passively train and maintain brain health in different cognitive areas. This leads to the belief that playing video games can actually help stave off age-related decline. Top-tier esports stars can average north of 300 actions per minute, leading to an increased capacity for cognitive load. And then similar to that dribbling study that I mentioned earlier, prefrontal cortex activity in gamers can be turned down during intense parts of their game. Researchers believe this is indicative of reaching that coveted flow state or being in the zone for what they're supposed to do. Pro gamers have been shown to have a more efficient working memory, and this allows for more information to be recalled when needed, potentially contributing to their faster overall reaction speed. All right, thank you for staying with me up to this point. I know I threw a lot of information at you, so it's a free tip that we're going to hand out today. Some of the best athletes are excellent at selective memory with the ability to quickly forget about the mistakes, the misses, and the pressures of the moment. We've seen this work in elite athletes across multiple sports, that essentially athletes with higher working memory scores when tested also have a higher fear of failure score. And so the thought behind this is that, and this has been seen especially in endurance athletes where they have nothing but time to think while they're running, right? They essentially get in their own way. A large working memory capacity allows for lots of thoughts of failure, what if scenarios, or cracking under the pressure of the competition. So trust in your skills, let it go, and just win. So to recap, elite athletes have elite brains. A genius is a genius regardless of the modality. Not all brains are built the same. We saw that a little bit earlier with our ballerina and our bunny rabbit versus bird. Individual performance and understanding the brain vitals that I mentioned can really give deeper insight into how to best coach and train them. Specialization can occur at the positional level, and it does make a difference. We can test to better identify from a talent level to strengths and weaknesses. We train to get better. And so you can use neuroperformance training to actually improve the existing talent within whatever field that you're working in. Specific training and boosts to cognitive skills will improve brain performance. So it's more than just sports. We're going to see this on and off the field. We can use brain training and our understanding of the brain to stay healthy and help improve our speed of recovery and lengthen our career, right? Be the best for longer by helping keep your brain at an age at an optimal level for what you're doing. So that's it. That was a lot of information. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate everybody tuning in. So I'm going to hand this over to the panel and see if there's any discussion points or questions. But thanks for your time.
Thank you, Tom. Any questions from the panel?
Oh, awesome. Inspirational, Tom. Love seeing the connections across to the athletics world and how that can impact. And that quote, a genius brain is a genius regardless of the modality. I think there's lots of kids in school that would really like to understand that and hear that message. Can you explain a little bit more to us, please, about the type of evaluation and reporting that individuals receive in the program? Can you give me a bit more detail on that, please?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple different ways to skin it, right? In an ideal world, we'd get everybody in an fMRI machine and look at their brain as they're thinking and doing things, but that's not really feasible or cost effective, right? So you can look at it from a couple different approaches where you can kind of do a quick and non-neuroscience expert there to be able to do it. And so what I would say is that would test your cognitive vital signs. And so that can be done within 15 to 20 minutes, where just like I mentioned, going to a personal trainer and getting that strength and cardio and component, we're looking at that from the brain perspective. So we are measuring reaction speed, memory, getting information about their sleep patterns, their interests, as well as visual processing speed and other things, right? And so we can collect all that information relatively quickly. And so that's kind of the first step, the first dip into the world of neuroperformance from that regard, right? The next step in would be to go a little bit deeper and put one of those headsets on an individual and collect that neurophysiological data. Let's look at and correlate those vital sign scores with the cognitive networks and capacities from a neurophysiological level, right? And I think that's really important because historically, and some of the early questions you get from folks who are just starting to get into this is, how are you sure that this isn't practice effects or learning effects, right? They get good at the test, they get good at the exercise, they're not really getting any better, right? Where's that transfer of learning? And so by using EEG and other physiological measures, we're back to that objective data collection again, right? your brain doesn't lie. And so if we're able to measure those network strengths, the speed and the efficiency of your brain, we can actually show physiological changes, right? When you're at the gym and you're doing those curls, a couple weeks in, you're looking at the mirror and you're saying, hey, my muscles are getting bigger. I'm seeing better striation. I'm lifting heavier weights. Your brain's a little bit of a black box in that regard. And so what we try to do with a lot of the results from the testing is actually provide visual physiological evidence that that change is actually occurring. And then I actually have, bear with me, in one of my backup slides, hopefully this comes in, some sample reporting. So it's a little blurred out, but what you can see on the left-hand side is what I would say is like a quick one-pager. And this gives you information about all the major points of what you were good at, what you were bad at. We can compare you to our other populations, right? So whether it's, in school, pro athletes in a specific sport, elite operators in the military, you see where you rack and stack among your peers and among the groups that you're probably really interested in, right? You can see visualization of your brain. You can actually get an actual literal picture of your brain and see the activity that's going on. See how those different networks are intertwined and how they're working, whether optimally or giving you the info to actually say, I can improve a little bit, right? And then on the right is just a plethora of information that we could provide from a teaming reporting standpoint, right? So measuring teams, groups as small as 4 all the way to groups as over 50, right? When you think about football and the amount of substitutions that they have and all the players on offense and defense and everything else, there's a lot of players that are going to be on the field on any given moment. So we're able to take all those players, collect all that data together, and do group analysis and actually rack and stack within your organization. This is where that idea of cognitively driven roster depth charts come from, right? Is that we can look at the brain capabilities and capacities and make suggestions based off of brain data alone, who's going to do very well and who may struggle a little bit. And that's extremely informative to coaches, right? Because for a lot of sports, you're only as good as the next man up. And for a lot of those sports, the next man up is probably, the delta is pretty significant between the starter and the sub. And so being able to identify that, it's not a weakness. It's not saying that they're not good. What it's saying is here's a great opportunity to take the extra time, get the extra reps, both on the practice field, but in the cognitive space as well, to drive yourself up to those higher level performing athletes, right? And so whether it's in the school, it's relatively easy, right? You're able to see who gets A's, who doesn't get A's, right? Who to model yourself after. This gives you that opportunity to model yourself after the elite athletes who may have, the grading scale may be a little bit more difficult because physicality is involved. But if I can see that my brain is just as good as a top tier athlete, that's highly incentivizing. And I want to actually work harder to be able to show that talent on the field.
So if I may beg the panel to extend me another question on there, an extension of that one. So can that correlate through to a business team? In other words, can you get your leadership team and do this same sort of thing as what you've done with an elite sporting team?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And interestingly enough, some of the earlier work that I've done in the defense world, right? So the Department of Defense, teams are pretty critical, right? And no different than a boardroom in a sense of your executives. Everybody has, again, their own specialization. And some personalities work well with others. Some skill sets work well with others. And one of the things that we did was we looked at kind of the neurosynchrony of a team of submariners. So folks that are in a submarine that are working together doing high intensive training and missions in a very stressful environment. And what we saw, and you've probably heard this adage many times about being on the same page, being on the same wavelength, it's actually physiologically true. Good teams will show synchrony across those different EEG wave patterns when they're working well together, right? So it's physiologically proven, and this could be done without speaking words, right? So it could be done through body language or just the trust and the association of this person's doing this thing versus somebody's doing something else. And that also extends to, specifically to your point, in the corporate world, right? It takes a lot of cognitive prowess to be a C-suite position, no matter what the domain is. There's a lot of experience involved, but there's also quick reaction, right? Thinking under pressure, being able to recognize patterns of something that could go wrong before they do, right? So these same cognitive vital signs that I've mentioned from a sporting perspective and an athletic perspective play a huge role in the boardroom as well. And the great news, Steve and I have actually done significant work in the past working with corporations and improving those cognitive capabilities. And the feedback's great, not only from the individuals themselves saying that, hey, I feel better, things are clearer, I'm getting better sleep, but top-down feedback from their superiors and their management says that the efficiency and the productivity of their work is getting better as well. So pretty much anything that you see, whether it's in the classroom, the boardroom, or on the pitch, it's applicable. And training from the neck up is just, it seems like a smart move.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Tom, let me just ask one side question and make a comment. So first we had a question from the audience about, so how do you talk to somebody who's committed to being a young athlete, right, where the probability is somewhat low that they can make a career out of it, and how do you get them to convince, working in the academic environment? So my comment was, learning how to be mindful, how to turn it up and turn it down is really the skill that should generalize in either direction. If you're a coach, you have a hard time getting a player to focus on their craft, whether it's reading, math, or throwing a curveball, right? They have to learn how to turn it up, and then they have to learn how to let it go. The question I had for you was, what's the time course, when you think about how brain changes occur? Right? Is this something that, what's the time period that somebody can think about evaluating whether they're trying to get better in the boardroom or whether they're trying to get better out on the pitch? What's the kind of time course that you think people should be thinking about for seeing results?
Yeah, and it's a great point, right? Because just like when you go to the gym, your biggest ally or your biggest adversary is the mirror, right? You want to see results, and you want to see results relatively quickly. And that can be even more difficult when you're talking about what's going on in here. Historically, we've seen, and in some of the examples that I provided on a few of the slides, you'll start to see changes within a matter of weeks, right? Typically, it's my feeling and my belief that you'll start to see behavioral changes, self-reporting changes within 2 to 3 weeks of consistent training. And by consistent training, I'm sticking to the Mersnick model of 15 to 20 minutes a day, 3 to 4 days a week, right? And obviously, if you want to do more than that, you're welcome to. There's no negative deleterious impact of doing more. But you'll typically see behavioral changes within 1 to 2 weeks. You'll start to hear from coaches or teachers within that same time period, kind of passively but subjectively monitoring that you're seeing change in that individual as well. But that self-report and survey is great to a certain point, but when at the end of the day, performance is what matters, that's where things start to really kick into gear. So a lot of these training studies, like the soccer study for the increase in passing accuracy, and some of the other works that's been out there, you're typically going to see what I would call real-world behavioral changes and impact within a couple weeks. And again, with that kind of consistent training, just like you would for anything else, this isn't as seen on TV capability where you just rub the lamp and the genie comes out and just makes you better, right? You actually have to do the work, but you'll start to see behavioral changes in that field, in that sport, probably within about a month. And it may be subtle. And this is where some of the big data analytics come in handy, is that full-time data analysts are looking at these things, right? And so you're going to be able to start to tease apart and untangle the impact that you're having there. And that's a big part of where we try to work, right? We're not just trying to tell you how to get better. We want to work with you to identify what are those KPIs, what are those key metrics for success in your sport, in your domain, in your classroom. And so again, within, I'd say a month and a half, you might start to see that a little bit too. And then to kind of go all the way out from the neurophysiological perspective, right? My thick brains, my increase in gray cortical matter and everything else, you're going to see those physiological changes as early as 3 to 4 weeks, but typically 6 to 8 weeks, right? So, 2 to 3 months is an ideal time to do another physiological and cognitive assessment to actually be able to track those changes, show the improvement. And this goes into that third T of tracking, right? Let's identify, let's see how your training is gone. We're seeing the improvements. Now let's go back in and change the training up to make sure that we're able to push you at that further limit. So there's a lot of steps in play, and it's a long roundabout answer to your question, but you're going to see it early, but you're going to see different types of improvements continuously over the course of a season or an academic calendar based on what you're looking at to see the change.
First of all, it's absolutely fascinating talk. I mean, there's really, there's so many points of departure for questions here, like with synchronous teams. It's amazing stuff. I'm curious also, how do you understand plateaus and slumps in athletes, and are they different in elite athletes, like how they manage their cognitive?
Yeah, so I mentioned it a little bit. It's interesting because you would expect, and I think this is the bias of thinking of everything from a physical perspective, right? That you would just naturally see plateaus and peaks, right? We can only get so strong. We're really starting to see the upper limit, especially in the Olympics, of like long jump and 100 meters, right? Those world records are not being broken as easily anymore. And if they are, we're at, shavings of a millisecond level difference, right? So that idea of capping out talent, I think is just kind of inherently in our heads. But when we've looked at measuring and improving these cognitive vital signs in athletes, it's unbelievable to see just how high they can go. And the players that are invested and want to continue to work, that there's just no glass ceiling, right? They continue to gain, they continue to gain, they continue to gain. But the plateaus you see are similar in a sense to what you would see from a physical standpoint. And this is why the tracking is so important, is because you can only get so far with a given exercise, right? You can only get so far by walking 1 mile every day or running a 7-minute mile every day, right? You have to change it up. And, whether it's high impact interval training or doing different types of exercises or different muscle groups, you inherently know and can see that impact from a physical standpoint. It's no different than from the brain's perspective, right? Steph Curry, arguably one of the best ISO ball players in basketball, he's at the top of his game. So you got to imagine it's going to take a lot to actually challenge him, right? Which is why you see him being blinded, doing things with his offhand, right? I mean, it's the 2021 version of standing on one leg and tapping your head and rubbing your stomach, right? And so being able to push through those, what I would say, cognitive plateaus, adding on those additional plates of weight for those reps is really key. But a lot of times it comes down to engagement, right? If I do the same exercise for a couple weeks at a time and I'm crushing it, I'm over it, right? I already know I'm the best at a lot of things if I'm a pro athlete. If I'm already doing the best I can at this, then I don't really care anymore. And you're going to see a kind of a natural behavioral plateau from there, which is why keeping engagements high, right? Doing leaderboards, getting people to compete against themselves, seeing how they compete against folks within other sports, right? If I was a baseball player, I'd want to know how LeBron James would do, right? With his cognitive profile, right? So to be able to compare myself to others inherently engages people a little bit more. And so you're able to kind of get what I would call that behavioral stickiness plateau of like, I'm just over it and I don't want to do it anymore, and push through that and get those additional gains.
Yeah. Tom, I just wanted to add, we all know the stories about Kobe, Steph Curry, and others where they're trying to make consecutive shots. And that's one way to increase the cognitive load and demand, right? They want to get 100 free throws in a row, or they start over again, right? So it's one of those ways where you can do the same thing in homework, in other domains or other areas. And so, and then I wanted to add our physiotherapist on the panel does a lot of work with building physical skills to decrease that cognitive load when kids are in studying. And then I know Cheryl has a question, so I'll let her.
Thank you, Tom. That was brilliant, really insightful and very interesting. My question actually, extends a little bit from Alex's question on the issue of plateau. So do you think that, that you're not seeing, plateau apart from, the athletes being disengaged? Do you think that whole idea can be extrapolated to, the ordinary population such that, whether the sky's the limit and it's the behavioral, the mindsets that we got to be looking at, or is there really like a genetic ceiling, beyond which, you can't get gains anymore? So do you think it's more of what we're seeing that's really the behavioral, perhaps the mindsets?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it's not one that I can easily answer in 10 seconds, but from my opinion, if you're asking me personally, I think there obviously, there's some genetic component, right? There's going to be some environmental influence when you look at the studies of identical twins who have the same exact genetic layout, who could live completely different lives based off of environmental influence, right? So I think you could argue, and rightfully so, that there are some fundamental building blocks in play that potentially would put somebody ahead of somebody else from the start, right? But that's not to say that that person who may be behind can't catch up, right? And that's a big part of what I really believe in, is getting folks to understand, whether it's classroom oriented or sports oriented, you're not stuck with the brain that you're born with, right? This idea of cognitive training and neuroperformance, anybody can do it, right? And anybody is going to see gains. And so, Steve mentioned this idea of shooting 100 three-pointers in a row, right? It's not just that. It's not just the practice. It's not just the repetition. That obviously helps. That gets back into the specialization argument. But now you're seeing athletes who are taking off-balance shots, right? Or doing ridiculous shots. Like the field of shooting has moved from the three-point line all the way back to half court. It was originally like a crazy idea to shoot from back there, but to stay competitive and to stay ahead, people push themselves to get to a new limit. And so I think you can really conceptually believe that if you put the time in, the dedication from a practice standpoint, just like musicians, right? You have to practice to be able to build those fine motor movement controls for playing a string instrument, right? It's beneficial at an earlier age because your brain's more plastic. But your brain's still plastic as you become a teenager, as you become an adult. You just have to put a little bit more elbow grease into it to start to see the gains and the changes that you would expect to see in a different population set.
Thank you.
Great.
Awesome.
Yeah. And officially, there's been no plateau identified in elite athletes in a variety of skills from other labs. So nobody yet says, hey, you can't get beyond this mark.
Wow. Great. It's a hopeful message, I think.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a big part of, I think, where the excitement is for what we're doing, is that you take this idea, like neuroscience as a field is typically always focused on the broken brain side of the spectrum, right? And even our webinar series started out looking at things like ADHD, right? And how we can improve those folks and see how we can get them back to a baseline level of performance. For us, my interest and where my career has taken me is the idea of, let's look all the way on the other end of the thing, and let's look at those elite brains. And if we're able to show that we can change and improve those players or those individuals, music, military, what have you, and make them better, then not only is that inspiring for everybody else, everybody on this platform included, all the way through to the broken side, right? If I can make a difference in an elite brain, even if it's a 10% difference, then I would expect it to be a 20% difference in another group, a 30%, a 50, 100% difference, right? And so the idea of being able to study the greats and being able to apply that methodology to everybody else is really exciting to see what a change we can make.
Yeah, and I think the key for me is, it means, back to Cheryl's question, the genetic or adverse environmental impacts that happen early on have a consequence in that they put you on a poor learning path, and therefore they create a bigger distance between that performer at the low end and the performer at the high end. Where if you were born with certain equipment or certain experiences or certain environmental enrichment activities, you start out earlier on. But in all honesty, everybody really goes through the same learning course. It's just how long the time is for you to get through it because of that, or those earlier, experiences or genetics.
Reach.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. Thank you to the panel. We are at the top of the hour. And just want to thank all of you for joining us again. And as well as thank you to our partners from Learn Fast, Stronger Brains, Brain Maps, and Brain Fit. And I see Tom was bringing up our upcoming session. For some of you have been following us all through our series. This was session 5 of our series. We are going to have our next session next month with Dr. Paula Talal, and she'll be discussing improving educational outcomes by enhancing the perceptual, cognitive, and language skills of students. So hopefully you can join us for that session, and please visit our website for additional sessions.
Great.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Brilliant talk, Tom.
Yeah.
Go train. Go train.